Before we begin, if you love God and you believe Christians should not be killed, make sure you are subscribed to History Clarity with notifications on. The story you are about to hear is one you won't forget.
We all know the Roman Empire, its glory, its power, its legions, the empire that conquered the known world and shaped civilization itself. But behind the marble, behind the triumphs, there's a darker story, one written in blood and silence, the story of a people hunted for their faith. What if I told you the worst violence against Christians didn't happen under Nero, the madman who burned Rome? No, it came from a ruler praised as a restorer of tradition, a savior of the old gods. His name? Emperor Decius. Then who was he, and why did he unleash the most systematic killing of Christians in Roman history? The truth is more terrifying than madness. Stay with me. To understand the horror, we must step back to the year 250 AD. The empire is vast, powerful, but trembling with fear. For 2 centuries, Christians have been a mystery to Rome. They refuse to worship the emperor, they meet in secret, and they spread fast. To Roman eyes, they're atheists, enemies of the gods, threatening the divine peace that keeps the empire safe. Rome's strength wasn't just armies, it was faith in its gods. To refuse the gods was treason against heaven itself. And when fear strikes an empire, it always looks for someone to blame. Then came the storm, the Plague of Cyprian, a disease so deadly it felt like the end of the world. Bodies piled in the streets, cities emptied, families vanished. Priests and soldiers alike fell to the unseen enemy. Desperation swept across the empire. The people demanded answers. The priests demanded sacrifice. The emperors demanded control. In their fear, the Romans turned to what they knew: appease the gods, punish the disloyal, and restore the old ways. And in every shadowed corner of the empire, one name was whispered with hatred: Christian. They were blamed for angering the gods, for inviting chaos, for breaking Rome's sacred peace. And soon, whispers became laws. Laws became orders. Orders became blood. This was not random persecution. It was preparation for something bigger, something that would reach every city, every household, every believer. The empire was ready to make loyalty a matter of life or death.
Imagine a world where every man, woman, and child must prove their faith to the gods or die. That world was about to begin. As the plague raged, Emperor Decius rose to power, a soldier, a patriot, and a believer in the old gods. He didn't want chaos, he wanted order, but his order would demand blood. He looked at Rome's decline and saw the cause. The gods had been abandoned. In his mind, restoring Rome meant restoring the old religion. No exceptions. To be Roman was to worship the gods. To reject them was to reject Rome itself. So Decius came up with a plan, one that would test the loyalty of every person in the empire. A test that was impossible for Christians to pass without betraying their faith. If you understand why Rome was paranoid, why faith became fear, hit that like button and let's uncover what happened next. Because the empire's demand for unity was about to create the greatest machinery of persecution the ancient world had ever seen. If you're beginning to understand why the Romans feared the Christians, take a second to like this video and subscribe to History Clarity. It helps us keep uncovering the truths they tried to erase. Enter Emperor Decius. Not a mad tyrant, not a monster, just a man who loved Rome more than anything else. And that made him dangerous. He believed that the gods had abandoned Rome because the people had abandoned them. The empire was sick, and faith was the cure. In 250 AD, Decius issued a decree that would change everything, the Edict of Decius. This wasn't just another imperial order, it was the first empire-wide command to test every citizen's loyalty through sacrifice. Every man, woman, and child had to go before Roman officials and offer incense to the gods. It was non-negotiable. When the sacrifice was complete, you received a small piece of paper, a libellus, proof that you had obeyed. Without it, you were branded a traitor. No libellus, no safety. This wasn't a mob with torches, it was bureaucracy turned deadly. A system that left no one untouched. For the first time in history, religion and citizenship were one. To be Roman meant to worship the gods or face the consequences.
Imagine standing in line before an altar, soldiers watching, incense burning, your life hanging on a single act of defiance or surrender. To most Romans, it was easy, just a gesture, a ritual. But for Christians, it was a direct denial of their God. They couldn't sprinkle the incense. They couldn't eat the sacrificial meat. To do so was to betray everything they believed. Duricus didn't want to destroy them, he wanted to break them. He wanted obedience, not corpses. But faith doesn't bend so easily. The decree spread through the empire like wildfire. Every province, every city, every village received the same chilling order. Officials recorded names. Witnesses signed papers. Every act of sacrifice was documented, stamped, and sealed. It was persecution on paper, organized, calculated, unstoppable. The empire had never moved with such unity in its mission to suppress a single group of people. The Christians were trapped. To live, they had to deny their faith. To keep their faith, they had to die. And as the edict took hold, the prisons began to fill. From Africa to Egypt, from Asia Minor to Rome, the order was absolute: sacrifice or die. Provincial governors held public trials. The faithful were dragged into the squares, questioned, mocked, and condemned. Some pleaded, some recanted, some broke down in tears. Others, trembling, whispered prayers as they faced the fire. Every region had its martyrs. Every church had its ghosts. In Carthage, the young bishop Cyprian watched in horror as his congregation was torn apart. In Rome, Pope Fabian was seized and executed, his body left in the streets as a warning to the rest. In Alexandria, Origen, the great theologian, was imprisoned and tortured for his faith. But the persecution didn't only strike leaders. Farmers, merchants, soldiers, ordinary people were forced to choose between their God and their lives. The empire's cruelty was precise: execution for leaders, exile for the wealthy, forced labor for the poor. This wasn't chaos, it was policy. Rome's iron machine had turned on its own citizens, and the blood of believers stained the empire's hands.
Every day, new names were written on the execution lists. Every refusal to sacrifice became a death sentence. But not all met the same fate. Some were imprisoned, their faith tested over and over through torture and deprivation. Others were sent to the mines, forced to work until their bodies broke, starved, beaten, and forgotten. And still, many refused to renounce their faith. To them, death was not defeat, it was testimony. They sang hymns as they faced the flames. They prayed as swords were raised above their necks.
Their courage stunned even their executioners. Across the empire, letters were written in secret, messages of encouragement from one Christian community to another. The faithful called those who died martyrs, witnesses to a higher truth than Rome itself. But not everyone could endure it. Many broke. Many offered the sacrifice and saved their lives, haunted forever by guilt. The church itself began to fracture. Those who stood firm and those who faltered argued over forgiveness and betrayal. Faith had become a battlefield, not of swords, but of conscience. Imagine hearing footsteps outside your door at night, knowing it could be soldiers coming for you, your spouse, or your children. You whisper prayers in the dark, hiding the sacred scrolls, hoping dawn won't bring your end. This was life under Decius's decree. Constant fear, constant faith, and the sound of boots echoing through empty streets. Families were torn apart. Friends reported friends. Even neighbors turned accusers to save themselves. And yet, in hidden rooms and catacombs, flickering candles still burned. Worship continued, quietly, defiantly. Every whispered prayer was an act of rebellion. Every refusal to sacrifice, a declaration that Rome's power stopped at the soul. The empire thought it could extinguish belief through force, but persecution only fanned the flames of faith. Letters from survivors speak of strength born from suffering, of peace in the face of agony. They believed that death was not the end, that martyrdom was victory, and that terrified Rome even more. Because the one thing the empire could not kill was conviction.
As months passed, the persecution intensified. More governors enforced the edict with brutal precision. Public executions became spectacles again, crowds gathering to watch the faithful meet their fate. But something strange happened. Instead of fear, admiration began to spread. Even pagans started to whisper, how do they face death with such peace? The image of Christians as weak or disloyal was breaking. Their courage spoke louder than propaganda. Each martyr's death became a story retold in secret gatherings, a spark that kept hope alive. For every believer executed, more took their place. Rome's attempt to erase Christianity only made it unforgettable. Still, the cost was unbearable. Entire families vanished. Entire communities were wiped out. The prisons overflowed. The mines filled with broken bodies. The empire bled its own people to prove loyalty to its gods. And through it all, Emperor Decius believed he was saving Rome, never realizing he was forging its greatest moral legend. The terror reached its peak. Rome had turned against its own people, and faith itself had become a crime. Christians were not dying for rebellion or politics. They were dying for refusing to pretend. In every province, the same question echoed, will you sacrifice to the gods of Rome or die for your Christ? Some knelt at the altar, trembling, and lived. Others stood tall, refused, and were led away in silence. Each execution was meant to break the church. Instead, it bound the survivors together in unshakable unity. Letters smuggled from prisons told of visions, songs, and forgiveness even for their torturers. For many believers, the empire's cruelty became proof that their faith was true. Even Roman officials began to question what kind of power could make people face death with joy instead of fear. And so the blood of martyrs became the seed of the faith. What Decius tried to destroy only grew stronger. By the end of 250 AD, Rome had created not submission, but legend.
Pause for a moment. Ask yourself honestly,
What would you have done? Would you sacrifice or die? Comment below. Then, almost as suddenly as it began, the persecution ended, not because of mercy, but because of war. In 251 AD, Emperor Decius rode out to face invading Goths on the Danube frontier. He was killed in battle, his body lost in the marshes, never recovered. The man who tried to purify Rome vanished into the mud of history. With his death, the edict lost its enforcer. The machinery of persecution slowed, then stopped. But the damage was done. Thousands were dead. The survivors carried scars both seen and unseen. Communities struggled to rebuild trust. Who had stood firm? Who had denied? Who could be forgiven? The church split, argued, and eventually healed, but it would never forget the Year of Terror. Decius's idea did not die with him. Later emperors, like Valerian and Diocletian, would revive his methods with even greater cruelty. His persecution became the blueprint for future tyrants: identify, isolate, and destroy through law, not chaos. Historians call it the Dacian persecution, the first truly systematic attempt to wipe out Christianity from within. It was not madness that made it so terrible, it was order. The calm efficiency of bureaucracy serving fear. Thousands died quietly. No riots, no flames, just paperwork, tribunals, and the silence of compliance. That silence makes it worse, because evil done by system is harder to see and harder to stop. But from that silence came strength. The faith that survived Decius became unbreakable. When Christianity finally emerged from the shadows, it carried with it the memory of every martyr who refused the flame. The empire that once demanded sacrifice to its gods would one day kneel before the cross it tried to destroy. That is the ultimate irony of history, and its deepest justice. Picture a single candle burning in the dark catacombs beneath Rome. That flame outlasted emperors, armies, and centuries. This story was almost forgotten. Help us bring more to light. Like, share, and subscribe to History Clarity for more hidden histories. Thank you for watching.